Hello, everyone. Good morning. Every year for 44 years, the State Department has written the most comprehensive and fact-based human rights report in the world. State Department team members in Washington and our embassies work with experts in many countries to get the most critical work done on this important topic. They continually set the gold standard, and this year is no exception. It's a broad and challenging mission, but human rights are at the core of what we believe as Americans, and so we have to execute this well. To Assistant Secretary Destro and everyone who worked on it, congratulations. Thank you for all of your hard work. As our founding documents remind us, nothing is more fundamental to our national identity than our belief in the rights and dignity of every single human being. It's in our Declaration of Independence. On this issue, all Americans have common cause with freedom-loving peoples all around the world. The State Department's Commission on Unalienable Rights is exploring the deep roots of America's foundational belief in these ideals, and I look forward to receiving the Commission's work sometime around the 4th of July of this year, a fitting time. We're blessed that the unalienable rights are secure here at home, but we all know the rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness don't just belong to Americans, they belong to everyone, everywhere. Today, this report sheds light on dark places where rights like the ones I described are infringed upon. I want to highlight this morning just a few examples of human rights abuses from the 2019 report that are happening in China, Iran, Venezuela, and in Cuba. In China, the Chinese Communist Party uses high-tech surveillance systems to monitor potential dissidents. It's imprisoning religious minorities in internment camps, part of its historic antipathy to religious believers. As I've said before, the CCP's records in Xinjiang is the stain of the century. It tries to hide what it's doing by intimidating journalists. Chinese citizens who want a better future are met with violence. In July, Wang Mayu stood outside a police station calling for elections. The police arrested him, and less than 3 months later, his wife got a call. He was dead. She never got an explanation. Instead, she was brought in and asked to identify a body so bruised and broken it was barely recognizable. This kind of abuse is too familiar in Iran as well. Just a couple months back, on December 19th, I spoke about Pouya Bakhtiari. He was a young engineer, one of hundreds of thousands of Iranians who protested the regime last fall. His mother, Nahid, was with him. By the end of the day, they were no longer marching shoulder to shoulder. Nahid was holding her 27-year-old son's body. Pouya had been shot in the head by security forces. And the family's nightmare was not over. Since my speech 3 months ago, the regime has denied them the right to mourn Pouya in accordance with their faith. When they tried to hold a funeral, Pouya's 11-year-old nephew, his grandparents, his parents, and other relatives were all arrested. They've been released now, but live in fear under house arrest. Today, I want great Iranians like the Bakhtiaris to know America remembers those lost and stands for their freedom. The report also details abuses the illegitimate Maduro regime commits every day against Venezuelans, including extrajudicial killings, forced disappearances, torture, and arbitrary detentions. Last year, opposition leader Alwin Mendoza was hauled before a military tribunal. His crime? His crime is that he protested in favor of humanitarian aid delivery. Maduro's thugs locked him up. Neither his family nor a doctor could visit, and 1 month later, he had died at the age of 34. My final comment this morning is on Cuba. The name Jose Daniel Ferrer appears 17 times in this report. He's one of thousands of political prisoners who, over the years, have been dragged, chained, and beaten at the hands of the regime. Tomorrow, he will be sentenced by a Cuban court. The spurious charges we've seen so far follow a pattern of arbitrary intimidation against Cuban citizens whose only crimes are to criticize the policies that have held that island back for 61 long years. We pray for a day when Cubans, Venezuelans, Chinese, Iranians, and all peoples can speak and assemble freely without fear of their own governments. The 2019 Human Rights Report honors those I've named and who have paid the ultimate sacrifice, fighting for freedom and for human dignity. It's a service to those punished for their beliefs and those who continue the fight. It also promotes peace, accountability, and security by reminding every government of the high standards of human rights that they must live up to. And finally, this report is a sign of America's continued belief in the peoples of the world who challenge their governments to respect and uphold fundamental rights for every one of their citizens. Assistant Secretary Destro, well done. Bob will now take a few of your questions. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Let me make a few opening remarks, and then I'll be open for questions. It's a great privilege to represent the United States in this forum and to work as a public servant along with the thousands of dedicated State Department employees who worked on this effort. One of the results of that work is the annual report. They look beyond law, policy, or statements of intent and examine what a government actually did to protect human rights during the year and to promote accountability for violations and abuse. As the old statement goes, actions speak louder than words. The 2019 Country Reports on Human Rights Practices is the 44th such report that we've had the honor to present to the United States Congress. The Department of State is required by law to report annually on the status of internationally recognized human and worker rights in all countries that are members of the United Nations. This year's reports summarize the situation in 199 countries and territories. The Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor works with our colleagues in U.S. embassies around the world to create these reports. We also work with them every day on U.S. efforts to promote democracy, protect human rights, and advance labor rights. I want to express my thanks to them for their hard work and dedication to this report, its accuracy, and more importantly, the greater mission it supports. Together, we support human rights defenders in a wide variety of environments who risk their lives to instill in their own societies the respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms that we as Americans hold dear and take for granted. We must not, as these reports too often show, take these freedoms for granted. I think it's important to stress again that what we're looking at here is internationally recognized human rights. These are rights and freedoms that are encompassed in documents such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They are the products of consensus among a wide cross-section of global rights traditions stemming from different faiths, cultures, regions, ethnicities, and backgrounds. Our objective is to report accurately on human rights conditions around the world and to report both the good and the bad. It's easy for governments to say that they support human rights. It's harder actually to do so year after year. These reports provide accurate information and examples gathered from multiple credible sources. What the world chooses to do with the information is up to them. We hope that people will demand accountability from their governments. We urge that citizens of every nation will respect the individual dignity of their fellow countrymen and women. And we hope that the world as a whole begins to see, as we do, that respect for the inherent dignity of every person is the foundation of lasting peace and security. The 2019 country reports will be available to the public on the State Department website at www.state.gov when this press briefing concludes. Thank you, and now I look forward to taking your questions.
Go ahead, Sean.
Sure. Thanks for taking our questions. Could I ask you a little bit more about China? The Secretary was quite forceful in his comments about China. Do you believe that what's happening in Xinjiang rises to the level of crimes against humanity? That's been a term that's been mentioned by a number of organizations, and specifically in Xinjiang, the issue of forced labor. That's something I know, particularly in the Hill, there's been talk about trying to make sure that products sold in the United States are not made through forced labor from interned Uyghurs. What is the State Department's position on making sure that that's not happening?
Well, we have spoken out very strongly about what's going on in Xinjiang, not only the forced labor in Xinjiang, but also the forced labor that China exports to other places. We've spoken out in as strong a term as possible. It's not necessary right now to draw any conclusions with respect to the ultimate question that you asked, but the Secretary himself has called it one of the worst human rights violations in recent memory.
Carol?
I have two questions. I'll be brief, though. In the section in Saudi Arabia, it mentions the concerns about the transparency and accountability of the Saudi government in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Why did the report not say anything about any observations made by U.S. Embassy personnel who may have attended the trial? And in the section on Guatemala, it says migration authorities lacked adequate training about rules for establishing refugee status, but the administration has been deporting refugees there, saying that they have a full and fair opportunity to apply for asylum there. Does this report undercut that rationale? Thank you.
Okay, let me deal with each question in turn. Let's start by recognizing that the murder of Jamal Khashoggi was an unacceptable crime. We have spoken to the Saudi leadership from the king down about our concerns. The position that we have taken hasn't changed, but I'm not sure I really kind of understand the question about embassy personnel. So do you want to kind of expand on that for a sec?
Well, there were people from the embassy who were attending the trial and the closed trial that was held.
Okay.
And why did you not include any observations they have made about that trial that is not being
Because we
released?
don't, in these reports, even though there may be high-profile trials in various countries, we tend not to report on them unless they're emblematic of what's going on otherwise. I think that we've reported on the lack of transparency in Saudi Arabia. The Khashoggi trial, I think, is an example of that lack of transparency. But beyond that, it wouldn't. There's only so much real estate in these reports. And so, and then your second question was about Guatemala?
The policy on the migration authorities
Right.
not receiving adequate training.
Okay, hold on one second here. Let me just find my notes.
You need an iPad.
Pardon?
You need an iPad.
Yeah, it's my daughter actually looked at this and she said, "You actually read all this?" I says, "Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I did." So, all right. So what we're trying to do in all of this, we've got two different problems. We're trying to help the countries in the Northern Triangle to address the drivers of illegal immigration and to strengthen those institutions. So when we look at what we're trying to do, with the folks in Guatemala, we're trying to protect those vulnerable families that have made this long trip up. But at the same time, we have to have respect for the rule of law and the whole question of asylum processing. So it seems to me that there's nothing in the reports that would undercut that. The reports are very accurate. They report on what happened last year. And so, no, I don't think there's any inconsistency whatsoever.
Right behind Carol. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. On North Korea, on the COVID-19 coronavirus in North Korea, and regarding in the North Korean human rights abuse, do you have any information about the coronavirus in North Korea? Because Kim Jong-un hide for this virus is not big serious problem, but do you find out recently what's happening in North Korea and to worry about the North Korean people?
Well, the short answer to your question is that, of course, we're concerned about the North Korean people, and we extend our sympathies to all of the families that find themselves in the unfortunate situation of being infected. But we also know that North Korea is a very closed society. Information is very hard to come by, but I do know that that our government has reached out, to North Korea, to Iran, and, to China, to everybody, and said, look, to the extent that we can be useful, we will try and be useful and provide assistance. We've done that in any number of occasions. So the short answer is I don't know about the penetration of coronavirus there, but and I can't speculate.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay.
Thanks. You described an important, extensive, thorough documentation, 199 countries. Do you think the fact that the Secretary chooses to single out the 4 main adversaries of the United States at this point, including 3 that are under U.S. sanctions, might decrease the impact of the document and, people would and support criticism that human rights are being politicized?
No, I really don't. I think that the Secretary's choices are his own, and they reflect current American policy. And so but one of the things I think any fair-minded person who reads these reports will see is that they're pretty hard-hitting across the board. And so we're no more or less hard-hitting with respect to those countries than we are to other countries that are flagged here for having problems.
Well, I think Prince Mohammed bin Salman mentioned in the section about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, given that U.S. intelligence has concluded he played a role in that murder.
Hold on 1 second. Let me just see. We're not, generally speaking, hold on 1 second. I think what we have made clear across the board is that we don't mention high-profile cases unless they're emblematic of a country's approach to cases like this case. We have taken significant actions against people in Saudi Arabia. We've imposed visa restrictions and financial sanctions. So the question of accountability is we're looking at all the facts. We're continuing to look at all the facts. That investigation, as I understand it, is ongoing. And if more facts come to light about who's responsible for what, we'll make comments at that point.
But the U.S.'s
Okay,
own
thank you,
intelligence
Saeed.
community
Go
has
ahead.
concluded
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Regarding Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, we have seen a spike in home demolitions over the past 14 months, and it's likely to increase. I mean, the indication of the first 2 months of this year also show a higher spike in East Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank. What is your position on the home demolition? Besides reporting on that, what are you doing in terms of deterring the Israelis from doing so? And does it fall under collective punishment? Thank you.
I'm sorry?
Does
The
it
last
fall
part.
under collective punishment? Thank you.
Well, what I can tell you is that we intervene with every country when we consider there to be they're considered violations. Now let me just pull up the material on Israel here, and I think probably the best way to respond is that the United States intervenes actively with Israel anytime it perceives there to be a serious human rights problem. We have expressed our views with respect to discrimination that appears, and in terms of whether or not home demolitions are a significant human rights problem, those are issues we would raise with the government of Israel, and I'm certain that we have done so.
Okay, last question, Abby.
Hi, thanks again for doing this. What role did the Commission on Unalienable Rights play in the assessments in this report, if any, and what was the impact of their assessments?
The commission and DRL are completely separate, so they had absolutely no role in this, no influence, and that's a completely separate process. That's advisory to the secretary. This is a congressional report.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. You're good.
Are we
Thank
done?
you.
We're done?
You're
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
too bad.
thanks. Okay, thanks.
Thanks.